position it. There you go. Welcome to our research talk today. I would like to, the members of the Games Institute would like to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Halaman Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Thank you very much for attending this research seminar. Today we have with us PhD candidate Gustavo, who is getting very close to defending, finishing up his PhD research, no pressure, on gameful design. But today he's actually going to talk to us about something that is only peripherally related to the core topic of his research, and it's more a guide for new students that are interested in research design for HCI. Gustavo is going to talk a little bit about his experience over the past couple of years doing this kind of HCI research. So I'm very excited about this talk. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you're all excited. Hope everyone watching the stream is excited. Thank you very much, and Gustavo.
Thank you. So as Dan said, I'm going to try to do something different today and bring a little bit of my experience planning, executing, and publishing HCI studies. I'm not going to teach the research methods because one, there are lots of methods. I cannot teach them in 1 hour. And also, each study is a different method. But instead, what I wanted to do is to talk a little bit like beyond the methods. What are the small things that, with experience, you learn that if you do things this way, it will make your life easier. In the end, I'm going to bring a little bit of this experience and hopefully bring something that is going to be helpful to you. Maybe some of these things are obvious, or maybe you already heard someone talking about them. But if not, hope that my experience, you can learn something that will make your life easier when you're doing your studies. So briefly, I'm going to talk about choosing a research topic. Then we're going to spend most of the talk talking about planning, executing, and publishing studies. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to balance all these things in your life, which is not exactly part of the study, but it's an important part that also influences everything. So, okay, before you actually begin planning individual studies, you need to have your main research topic, right? So, there are lots of different ways that people use to choose a research topic. So, some already have an idea that they carry from previous research work. Some have just an inspiration for something that they can do, that they want to do. Something back in the graduate studies, not entirely certain exactly what they're going to do, and then they need to find exactly what that is. So how do you do that? So again, I cannot tell you exactly how you're going to do that, because it's different for everybody. But I just wanted to bring that from my experience. If you still don't have your topic and you're still looking for something, it is a good idea to get involved with what people around you are doing and see if you can fit your research there. Because sometimes we might have this expectation for ourselves that since we have to do something original, then we have to come up with that amazing idea that nobody has ever thought about that, and that puts a lot of pressure, and that isn't really necessary. Research is done a lot of times just by building a new block on top of what has been done so far, right? So if you look at what has been done so far, what people around you are doing, and then you can find there one block, the next step on something that nobody has done yet. That's a good topic right there, and makes your life easier if you're working with people that are also doing similar things, right? So if you do have an amazing original idea, you're going to invent a whole new research field, it's great, go and push it forward. But if you don't, and if you look around and you see opportunities that you can collaborate with people around you or just learn from their experiences to choose a topic, that's going to be good enough, right? That's what happened in my experience, for example. came here to begin my PhD knowing that I wanted to work on gamification, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. The original idea that I had was related to developing some health gamification application, but when I arrived here, I didn't find anything around me, so anybody that was already working on that. But on the other hand, the first months when I was working on my PhD, there were people talking about how to study user types to personalize gameful applications. There was a person from the gamification industry that was starting a project on that and looking for academic collaborators. And I contacted him and began working with him. And there, I ended up working on how to personalize gameful applications, and it has been a great topic that I really enjoyed studying so far. And I think it's going to be a good topic for my thesis in the end. So I'm saying, if you look for opportunities and one opportunity appears to do work together with other people, or just to build on their ideas, go for it. Never feel that it's not enough if you didn't come up with your main topic alone by yourself, because that's not necessary. Okay, so moving forward, now say you have a main idea and then you're going to plan a few studies around that idea. So how do you begin study? How do you choose a topic for a specific study, right? So I would say, my experience, some of the ways that can help you find things to investigate is observe the world around you, of course, so in that area that you are studying, see what people are doing, what they need, and I would say what I have been trying to do and has been working, identify what are the issues or the shortcomings of the current solutions, or what people need to do that they cannot do yet. So again, if you have an amazing original idea that nobody has ever done anything about it before, it's great, go ahead. But sometimes very good ideas just come from, let's see what you have done before and how can we do the next step. Right? So for example, some of the work that we have been done here on player types was just by taking on the work that Leonard had done previously, that some of you are familiar with, the BrainX, and then looking at that work and seeing that it had some shortcomings that we could try to further explore. So that ended up being not only one, but a few good research projects and publications that we have been doing, just by identifying, in this case, a shortcoming of a previous work and then thinking about how we could improve it. Other works that I've done came from identifying things that people needed. So in my work with personalized gamification, it began because this gamification consultant had an original idea how to classify user types in gamification, but he needed to test if that was really going to work, if that model was really valid. So there was a need. Someone was already looking for a partner to do that work. So I stepped in and it turned out to be really good work as well. Other example that we identified was the work that I did with the gameful design heuristics. Maybe you've heard about it. There's a poster there in the hallway. So for that work, basically, we were working with another master student and he was designing a game, and we were asking ourselves, okay, how can we evaluate this game here to see how good it is in terms of motivating people? And then we realized that we didn't have in the literature any formal method to evaluate games regarding motivation. We had games evaluation regarding other things, but not regarding motivation. So there was a need. We needed to do something. No method was available, and then maybe if we needed that, other people could also need similar methods. So identify that need. I started that project to create the game for design heuristics, which then is a method to evaluate how good your application or game is on motivating people. And I would here review the literature. as the last one, which should be one of the first. I saw a diagram that Joe posted on Slack yesterday that kind of said, observe the word, then come up with your question, and then review the literature. I don't see things exactly that way, because if you come up with your question before you review the literature, then chances are that you're going to ask a question that somebody already asked before, right? Because most of the questions that you can ask, people have already asked that question before. Sometimes you might you might find something that's really new and then maybe nobody asked the question before. But most of the times, people already asked that question before. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a research topic there, because chances are as well that even though people asked that question before, they don't have a final solution to that problem yet. Unless it's a very old problem that people have studied over and over. Most of the newer problems have somebody asking questions about it in some initial studies, but with still problems to solve, right? So I would say review the literature also comes before choosing a topic for your study, because you need to have that idea about what people have asked before and what solutions are they still missing, right? And that is also related with identifying issues or shortcomings of the existing research, identifying needs, right? So if you go to the literature, you identify, okay, people have tried that, but in the end, they said that their solution was not perfect because of this, or they said that for future work, somebody should do that. Those are all good ideas for research topics. So, there are many ways of choosing a research topic. Maybe what's going to work for you is something different, but it's just some, just from my experience, some of the things that might help you when you are deciding exactly what your studies are going to be about. Now, after you decide what you're going to study, probably your next step should be to write what is your goal or your research question. Well, in my first studies, I didn't pay much attention to this. I was excited to just, nice, I have a topic, let's begin studying it, collecting data, drawing conclusions. Then, later, it's really difficult to explain what you did, because if you didn't have a clear question in the end, you might have a lot of data, even a lot of conclusions from your data, but if you didn't know exactly what you were answering, those conclusions might not answer any clear question, right? So then I learned that this should essentially be one of the first steps, right? You know exactly what, you decide what your topic is, now decide exactly what you want to answer, right? So some of those things that can help you think about your goal or your research questions. What do you want to find? What problem do you want to solve? And also, why are you solving that problem? Who's going to be interested in your solution? And like I said here, goal or research question. Usually you have a research question, but not all projects are about answering a question. For example, one of my projects had a goal of developing and testing user type survey for gamification. Didn't really have a research question, but I had a clear goal, like developing a user type survey. So you will have one of them. We're going to think about these things, right? And not only what, but why are you solving that problem is also very helpful. And I've been talking about that even in some of the lab meetings. In theory, any research that produces new knowledge should be interesting, even if you don't have a clear idea exactly why that is important and who's going to use it. It produces new knowledge. Might be interesting to somebody. In theory, you could put the results out there, and maybe somebody's going to find a way to use the results. And that is true. However, if you want to publish your research in the most competitive conferences and journals, that is going to be difficult if you don't have a clear idea of who's going to use it in what's the application, right? And that's the thing we see in reviews, and I have received reviews like that, and maybe you did as well, like, well, you did a good study, but you didn't clearly say who is interested in your study, what's the application, how that's going to be used. Right? And that's because, well, it's just competitions for those spots, right? The conferences have a limited amount of days, and you can only fit so many presentations in those days. We just went through this with Leonard for Kai Play just last week, because we have a lot of submissions, and we were trying to fit the maximum number of presentations that we could in those 3 conference days, so we could accept more papers. But in the end, it's just you cannot fit more papers. And in the end, if people have to decide between 2 good studies, one of them does explain why people should be interested in those results and who can use them. And the other one is also a good study, well done, but it doesn't include an explanation. And imagine you are the person selecting papers for the conference, and you can only select one of them. You're going to select the paper that's good and that explains why it is important, right? So if you do that in the beginning when you are planning your study, it will be easier later when you write your paper, and you'll have more chance of being accepted in this competitive conference journals as well, if you can explain why it is important. Not that you cannot get your paper published. If you don't have that, it's just going to be harder on the main venues. You're probably going to have to publish somewhere else, right? That happened with one of my papers, for example. It was a result of a grad course that I took, and then I needed literature review and proposed the idea of creating recommender systems for gameful applications. But I didn't actually implement the idea. The course finished, and all I had was the idea, right? So it was hard to justify who is going to apply, since I just have the idea. I don't actually have an application that somebody can use. And that's what happened. That paper was not accepted as a full paper, as that's what people said. Well, it works just an idea for now. You don't, if you had the system, maybe we could accept it, but not now. And then I ended up publishing that paper just with the idea on a workshop, which is just, you're familiar already, but usually a lot of these conferences that we go have workshops the day before the conference, where people just meet in smaller groups to discuss a topic that's maybe not so mature yet, new ideas or something like that. So I published there. It was still a good publication, people reading and citing, so I'm happy with it. But just as I said, by not having a clear explanation of how people could apply that, it's hard to get with the publishing on a conference. So I ended up publishing it on a smaller workshop. Now, okay, after you have your goals, your research question, you know exactly what problem you want to solve and who is it for. So you need to decide what kind of study you're going to do. And then we can split studies basically on 2 groups, so quantitative studies or qualitative studies. Or of course you can also do mixed studies, which have both components. Now, I didn't formally study research methods and put all the different kinds of studies that exist here for this presentation, so I'm sure there are more types, but I just put here the kinds of study that I've done myself or that I've seen people doing frequently, the conference that I went and the reviews that I did. So kind of these are common study types for the topics that we work on. I'm sure there are many more study types. But, well, okay, so if you were going to do a quantitative study, so quantitative means basically that you have numbers, right? You're probably measuring something, doing some analysis with those numbers, and then reaching a conclusion in the end. So, probably the most basic common type of study is the experimental study, or where you test any hypothesis. So basically, you have trying to do a research question, you already have an initial hypothesis of what the answer should be, and then you test if that hypothesis is true or not. If you do a study this way,
Christian Castillo, been on the balls.
if you do a study this way, so planning the hypothesis in advance is also very important. So together with your research question, you should plan what your hypotheses are as well, right? And that is the right way of doing it. I was a bit negligent with that in the first days as well, but now I'm very careful. The right way of testing the hypothesis is you think about the hypothesis before you run the study, then you collect data and you do your statistical analysis and you test if the hypothesis is true or not. If you don't have a hypothesis before, you collect a bunch of data, you check the results, and then you write your hypothesis based on your results. That's kind of cheating, because now you're not testing anything, you're just kind of saying that your results are what they are. And I'm not going to go into details because we don't have time, but if somebody wants to discuss why that's not the right way to do it, we can discuss that later. But what I want to bring here is that, well, the right way to do it is you should think about what the hypotheses are before you actually do the study. And ideally, the hypothesis should be based on some theory or some goal or some justification. It's not just because I think so, right? So it might be based on some theory that you already have or some evidence from previous literature. So, say for example, I'm going to test again with and without sound and measure immersion, and I've read the previous literature and people say that sound helps with immersion, right? So I can say that I suppose when people play with sound on, they will feel more immersed because there's past work saying that it's probably going to be the case. So there, okay, I have previous literature to justify my hypothesis that immersion will be higher with sound than without sound. Hypothesis might also come from your design goal, for example. Say you observe people using virtual reality and you think the controls are too clumsy, and you try to design a new type of control that is going to be better. So you had this design goal, you try to make your control better than what the previous one was before, right? So you can reasonably say that your hypothesis is that your control is going to be better. That's what you were trying to do. And of course, you're going to test it and see if that's the case, right? But what I just want to synthesize here is that the hypothesis should come from somewhere. It's not just because I think so, but you should have some reason to justify why your hypotheses are the way they are. I have some examples open here just to quickly show examples of these different types of papers. So I didn't actually do any experimental study myself yet. I'm doing one now. So this is one example that Katja published with some other people here from the GI. So an experimental study, you might be doing things like that, just comparing some measure throughout different conditions. So I think that was with audio. Some people play with music, without music, with sound effects, without sound effects, and then comparing some values between them to test the hypothesis. So that could be one type of study, experimental study. So another type of study that I see people talking about is kind of exploring something or piloting something. So that might be something you do when you're investigating a new question and you don't have yet enough knowledge about it to even formulate the hypothesis. So you might be just, okay, let's just collect some data here and see what we get from it. So we're just exploring this space here and seeing what we can find out here. And these are, well, the name exploratory pilot already hints that usually these are initial studies on a topic, right? You're not going to get final solid conclusions from this kind of study, but you might get indications of things that might be worth investigating in the future. And another study that I guess not that common, but I've done this kind of study a lot, so just put it there, is skill development. So I've done a lot of work that is creating scales that people can answer and then to give you scores about your gamification user type or your player types. So this is basically about creating questions and then validating if these questions actually give you the score that they're supposed to give you. So, just to bring examples as well here. So, what I want to bring is just a quick impression here of how these papers might look like. But again, we can have so many different things. Just one example from my papers. So this was an exploratory study. Connected to the projector and everything is so small here, you cannot see. Okay, I guess I'll just show this part. So this was an exploratory study, so we were exploring different types of game elements and different personality traits, for example, to see if people with certain personalities enjoy this kind of game elements more. So we didn't actually have a lot of information beforehand, so we were just exploring. So exploratory studies might typically have lots of data, like we have different tables here in this study, because then we just test lots of different things, because we're just exploring, we're just seeing where we find something that might be interesting or not, right? So we noticed here that, not surprisingly, people that are more extroverted tend to like more game elements that are referred to social play. So we find things there that might be interesting in our exploration. And this other example here is about scale development. So we created a scale here for user types. So this table, I don't want you to read it, but just to see that we have several questions here. So this is a questionnaire that we would give people, and they would score how much they agree or not with those affirmations, right? And then we ask people to answer those questions, and we with some statistical analysis to see if people's answers really correspond to the score that we thought should like. I wrote a question that is supposed to test people's score on the philanthropist user type, for example, and then I do some statistical testing to see if all the questions that should be related to that user type really are. So if that's the kind of thing that you're doing, so you're doing a study that is scale development. So other type of study that you can do then are qualitative studies. So these happen when you are not measuring things, but you are analyzing the quality of things. So this could be, for example, a case study. So you observe one case happening in detail, and you try to understand exactly how things are happening, why you talk to people, then that can generate you better insights about something. Usually you're going to see that qualitative studies have this characteristic, while quantitative studies, the other types, will give you maybe a yes or no, yes, because this is true or not. They usually don't explain you why, and then qualitative studies usually give you that why, that better understanding of how things are actually happening there, so you can understand the details. So you can also do surveys. This would be send questions to somebody. But then if it's qualitative, then the answers are not going to be numbers. You maybe are going to have some free text fields there where you let people freely explain something, their impressions about the system that they used, or why they do things the way they do. So any question where people can say something about it, and then you can analyze that the answers from different people and try to find some patterns there. Interviews or focus groups are similar, but then instead of sending the questions like in a survey, then you are interviewing people and asking them about their experiences about something or their motivation to use a system, anything like that. I've seen some ethnographic studies as well, which basically means that you're gonna investigate things happening kind of in the real, not only the real world, but they happen naturally in the real world instead of setting a lab study. So I've seen an interesting study, is that the researcher spent a lot of time playing World of Warcraft and documenting everything and studying how rewards work on World of Warcraft, how he felt when he received rewards and things like that, how he used the rewards. So it's an ethnographic study because he was actually going there and playing, documenting and analyzing the experiences. That's an interesting study, right? I have to play World of Warcraft because it's for my study, but it's really interesting. And as I said, well, these studies can be mixed. It's quite common to have some initial part of your study where you collect the measures there. So you test if something is true or not. And then you have later a qualitative part where you ask people to explain. So this is an example of a study that I did with Rita that was mixed like this. So we have a qualitative part here where we showed people these storyboards of some ideas for persuasive strategies, and then we asked people how much would you feel persuaded by something like this. So we analyzed here if how much they would feel persuaded was related to their gamification user types, and then we asked them to explain why. And then we have the qualitative part here. We go to the next page. Where it's basically analyzing what people said, right? So if you look, the parts that are in italics here are quotes from what people said in regards to explaining why or why not they would feel persuaded by that story. So we have both elements here. The quantitative part shows as if the storyboards work and if they are related to the user types or not, but they don't explain us why. And then the qualitative part here, right, actually read people's explanations, and then we try to find commonalities between what different people said. Then we can begin to better understand why those storyboards really work or not. So the qualitative parts there. So you have your goal, your research question. You decided what kind of study you want to do to answer that research question. If you're doing an experimental study, you also need to think about what variables you're going to measure. So usually you would have what called the dependent variables. So these are kind of the outcomes of your measures, and the independent variables would be kind of the cause of that outcome. So if, just to keep doing the same example, I'm testing different games. I'm testing if the same game played with or without sound, it's gonna have different levels of immersion. So the independent variable is sound or no sound, right? That is what would be causing the differences in the outcome, and my outcome would be the level of immersion that people have when playing that game. So if I'm doing an experiment analysis, I also have to list which are going to be my variables there. So basically, what are the things that I'm going to measure, what different conditions I'm going to have, just sound or no sound, or maybe sound could be also music or sound effects. So can have two conditions or maybe different combinations of music and sound effects. So might have different conditions. So that's also part of planning what type of study I'm going to do. And for a real experimental study, you have to take care that the only thing that you're varying between the different conditions is your condition. And that usually means that you have to assign participants randomly to the conditions to ensure that there isn't anything else that might be affecting your condition there. If you did something like this, for example, everybody from University of Waterloo is going to play the game with sound. Then I'm also going to go and recruit people from Wilfrid Laurier University, and they're all going to play the other condition, right? So that's not a good design, because if I see differences on immersion, was it because of sound or no sound, or was it because people are from different universities and them being from different university for some reason causes people to feel differently immersed on the game, right? So if something like that happens, we have some sort of confounding variable there. In this case, the university where people come from would be the confounding variable, something that might be causing their difference in my outcome here. That's not what I want to test. So to have a really good experimental study, you have to avoid these kind of things, and that usually involves, as I said, randomly assigning people, right? So you can have people from two different universities coming, it's no problem, as long as you randomly assign them to the conditions. So in the end, you'll have kind of a similar number of people from both universities in both conditions, and that's okay. And the university where people come from will probably not going to be affecting your results. But sometimes you cannot really do random assignment of people to conditions. So when you cannot do that, you cannot say that it's a really an experimental study. So sometimes you do what people call quasi-experimental studies. It's almost an experimental study. It resembles one, but since you were not able to assign participants randomly, then you lose at least that part there. You might have some confounding variable then that you need to take care of. So you also need to think about that. If you can assign people randomly and do the experimental study, it's usually better. I mean, this is just a very short comment about things that you should think about. Just upon things that you should really study and learn more about them if you don't know much yet when you're planning your studies, but these are important things. And finally, you have to decide what statistical methods you're going to be using. I'm not actually going to read all of them here, put here just more as a reference, because if later you want to add the slides and look here and look as a reference of just the most common methods that I've seen, at least in the papers that I've been reading. There are many statistical methods for lots of different applications, so you could maybe not use any of these. But if you're doing what's more common, probably you're going to be doing something like this. You need to know if your data is normally distributed or is parametric data, which if it is, it basically means that when you plot a chart of your data, you will see something like this, like around the average. There's a lot of people that have that score, and then as you move farther from your average number, then less and less people have that score. If you have something that's very different from this, so if you have people with different scores here, that this would be, by the way, the score and the number of people that have that score. So if you don't have something like this, then the kind of statistical tests that you're going to use for some situations will need to be different. So that's something that usually we think about. Though most of the time you cannot do this decision when you're planning your study, because you need to actually collect data and then test if it follows a normal distribution or not. And if not, then you need to change the type of method that you're using. But I'm just bringing this because this is important and you should care about this and talk about this in the paper, right? If you just say, I compare things and I use an analysis of variance, the results are that, probably at least one of the reviewers are going to tell you, did you check if the data was normal before doing the analysis of variance? Because if you did not, then maybe your results are not valid. Right? So just bringing this because it's something that you need to care about and you need to actually write in the paper that you did consider these and you decided to use this statistical method because of this and that. So you can at least show some confidence that your results are valid. Okay, another thing that you also need to worry about now is not when planning, but when reporting your results after you've done the analysis, is that the probability of your hypothesis being true or not and the effect size of something are not the same thing. And that's something that people have really been talking about in not only in HCI studies, but also in HCI studies. So you need to be careful about that when reporting your results. For example, let's say I did my study there, let's say I created a new improved controller for virtual reality and I want to test them. So my hypothesis is that condition 2, it's my improved controller, will be better than the other controller, right? But let's say I only tested 20 people, 10 with each type of controller. So you might get something like this. Let's say you measure something on a scale of 0 to 10. How well did people perform with that controller? And on average, people that use the original controller scored 3, and people who used your new controller scored 8. It's pretty good, right? Since your controller is much better. But since you only had a few people, and by the way, I made up all these numbers, but just for the sake of the example, but something that might happen since you only have a few people is that you might have a probability that's not very good. So usually when you're testing hypotheses like this, you define before calculating your statistics what confidence you want to have, and then in this case the probability calculated here that this is not a coincidence is higher than what I had before. So I would have to say here on the paper, for example, that although it seems that there's a large difference here, I cannot actually reject my null hypothesis, and I cannot say that this is probably true. So I'd say, okay, I think that this happened just because I had only 20 participants. So now I spend the whole year and I recruit 1,000 participants, and I make 500 use one controller, 500 use the other controller. And now, let's say, out of people that used the original controller scored on average 7 on my performance test, there and other people that scored, that used my new improved controller scored on average 8. And now, when I do my probability test, usually the software only shows 0, but I put like a bunch of zeros in a 1 to make it look nice. But anyway, what matters is that the probability is much lower than my confidence there. Then I can safely reject the null hypothesis, and I can assume that my new controller is actually better than the old controller. But say if this is a scale from 0 to 10, do you care too much if better means going from 7 to 8? Maybe yes, maybe not. It's not much difference, right? So that's what I want to highlight, because sometimes people just look at this number here and, yes, I'm very sure that my controller is much better. But the problem with this sentence here is that, like, if these were the real numbers, you are very sure that your controller is better, yes, because you have a lot of participants. That's why you can be really sure. But the difference between them was actually not that large, right? So it's better, but it's just a little bit better. And then you would have to calculate another number, which is the effect size. So if you calculate the effect size in this case, it could say something like this, which is much lower than it was in the other study where you had 5 points of difference here, right? So here you saw a large effect size, but since you had just few participants, you were not very sure if this difference was because your controller was really better or just because randomness, just coincidence because of the people that you invited, etc. If you have a lot of participants, you can be sure of a lot of things just by having lots of participants. So usually when you get to these numbers, thousands of people, it's easy to get significant results, but you have to check what's the effect size as well. I mean, it can be something small. So you could still publish all these analyses in your paper, say that you made a test, you're very sure that your control is better, but you have to clearly tell people that, yes, it's a bit better, right? If you claim that your controller is much better, then people are going to see these numbers and say, yeah, no, you're saying it's much better, but I mean, people liked both controllers, yours just a bit more than the other one. So things to worry about when you are reporting the results of your study. People are really asking for effect size and for you to be clear about how better the things are on your testing. Because at this point, everybody realized that just being certain of something is not enough. You also need to know how much better things are. Okay, so by this point, if you planned everything, you have a pretty good idea of what you're gonna do. I suggest writing a document with this study design and everything there. I didn't do this for the first studies that I carried out, but now I've been trying to always do this. So you don't have a template, but just listed all the things that you can consider putting in your design document. The goals, the research questions that you have, that justification why you're doing this study, the geography that you use, what are your hypotheses, who are the participants that you're going to recruit and how, what's the procedure, so what participants are going to do, what you're going to measure and how you're going to analyze that. If you have this document, one, it's much better for you to be sure that you know exactly what you're doing. It's much better to communicate to your supervisor what you're doing so you can give suggestions, you can improve your study, you can communicate with people that might be helping you run the study so everybody knows exactly what to do. You also have all the information that you need here to submit your ethics application, so it's much better. Then, after you have your plan, you just have to follow it then. So probably you're doing something with human or animal participants, so you're going to have to submit an application to the ethics office. They can approve your study, and then you already have all the information that you need on your design document if you did one, so you just have to copy information to the ethics application form so you can inform them what you're doing. Then after you've approved, then okay, you can recruit participants, collect all the data, carry out the analysis, and you write your conclusions. And hopefully you have favorable conclusions and you're gonna want to publish a paper about that. Now, if you did write the study design document, then you already have your first paper draft. It's nice, right? So that's the thing that I realized. One of the reasons I began writing this document, because for the first papers I wrote, I did a bunch of analysis, and then when I went to write the paper, I didn't have this clear story about exactly why I did this, why this analysis and not others, how this analysis helped me solve the research question. Because if you leave to do that in the end, then it's confusing, right? If you have done everything in the beginning, then it's much easier. The introduction of your paper is going to basically be the goal, the research question, and the justification that you put in your study design document. You just write that. You have basically the introduction of your paper. Related work, so if you have already done your literature review, you already have a list of references, then you just summarize them for your related work there. The methods section of your paper, basically a summary of what are your hypotheses and why those hypotheses and not others, who are the participants that you recruited, and what was the procedure, what participants did. So you should have everything already in the design document. The results are going to be the measures and the analysis that you did. So your design document already had information about what you're going to do. Then of course you would have the results that maybe came out from a statistical software, or if it's qualitative analysis, you don't have the analysis and go to the conclusion somewhere, so you're going to copy this part here, and then of course just the discussion and the conclusion of your paper are the new parts that you're going to write up after you've done your study, and that didn't come directly from the study design. Although even in the discussion and the conclusion, probably you're going to point back to what was your goal in a research question and explain why and how you solved that goal or that research question. So even in the discussion and the conclusion, you're going to go back to what you had in your design document. So yeah, I've been doing that now, and I feel it's much easier when I get to the moment of writing the paper, and I have everything clear in my mind already. What was my goal, why I did that, how I did everything. So just translating everything into the paper format, then adding the results and the conclusion. It's much easier to write the paper than to try to figure out these questions after having done everything and then trying to justify why the paper is the way it is. So, of course, writing the paper and publishing it is an essential part of research, but in our group we've been doing some other things as well to bring more visibility to our papers. It's been very interesting so far, so I recommend also thinking about these things, like writing blog posts about the things that you've done, the papers that you've published. This is an example of a screenshot of our Medium blog for our It's Games group, where we have things about the papers there. In my case, having blog posts about my gamification papers allowed them to be well known and read by people in the gamification industry as well. Probably they won't be so keen to go and read the full papers, but the summary on my blog they read, and they gave me feedback, they showed interest in my work, so that is really interesting. And I'm sure it will help even other researchers find your work, because it's much better to just read a nice summary of somebody's work first to see if it's really what you're looking for, right? And then if it is, surely you're going to go look for the full paper, but at least you can have that first impression if it's what you like or not. So I've been doing some work with videos as well, talking about the research on podcasts. So everything helps bring visibility to the work. That's very interesting to do. And I didn't put it here, but publishing on research social media sites like ResearchGate, I find has been very helpful as well, not only for people to find out my work, but for me to find other people's work as well. Many times I have been notified by ResearchGate about an interesting paper from another researcher I know, and that was really related to the topic that I'm working on. It's really something interesting to do as well. Okay, so that finishes the large part of planning studies. So just for the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to comment as well on this side issue, but it's related as well that while you're doing all of this, to succeed as a graduate student, you need to think about how to balance things as well. And I mean, from what I've seen, I think people do this really well here. So with that, but just bring it to reinforce, because if you look for some sources, I mean, I've seen people commenting on the internet that if you're a graduate student and if you're not on your lab every day doing experiments, midnight, you're doing something wrong. But I cannot just agree with that. If you keep working too much all the time, you're just gonna burn out yourself. You're gonna be really tired. And after you burn out, then no matter how many hours you try to work, you cannot be productive. So I don't think that's a good strategy. graduate school should be something between 2 to 4 years or 5, 6. If you're gonna keep working too much for this amount of years, it's just not gonna work, right? So you need to find rhythm of working that works for you, that you can at the same time have a routine that you follow. So then you cannot fall into the opposite trap, that is, since you don't have fixed hours to work, then maybe you're distracted all the time, maybe you're not producing anything. So I find that it is a good, at least for me, it was a good idea to try to set up some hours, like if I was actually working on a place that would measure how many hours I'm working, and have something like, okay, from these hours until these hours of the day, I will be working, be here, be at home, but I will try to work from these hours until these hours, and then after that, I'm going to do whatever it works for you to relax and to rest. To work again the next day, so playing games, not going to the gym, not walking outside if the weather is cool, so whatever works. At least in my experience, productivity is much higher if you have a bonus and you are working a normal amount of hours than if you are working long hours all the time. Our work is intellectual work, so it's just not productive if we are too tired. So if you hear somebody saying that if you don't put long hours for years, you won't succeed as a graduate student, I don't think that's true. I think that having a good balance throughout those years is what's going to increase your productivity. And of course, sometimes things have peaks. Sometimes you have a paper deadline, and then you're going to stay up until late finishing your paper, but it's fine, right? It's not all the time. Oh, and finally, the last thing that I want to bring is this expression. It's even written in Old English, I think, and people have been talking about this since ancient Greece, so know yourself. But I wanted to bring this because I feel for me it has been something important as well. This is not only for graduate students, actually. This is for anything that you're doing in life. If you know yourself better, and you better know how to deal with situations, it's going to be easier to see. But especially for graduate students, people say and have statistics say that it's usually more difficult psychologically being a graduate student than working a regular job like that. So this becomes even more important. So what I'm trying to mention here is try to learn about yourself as well. How do you feel when you encounter difficult situations? How do you manage them? What can you do? Because learning about these things really can make a difference. It's usually something that we're just not taught, at least as much as other things. We learn about science, about statistical methods, we learn a lot of things, but usually if you don't go study about yourself, you might not learn anything about that. So to try to learn about how you can manage things like your stressful period with too much things to do. How can you handle that? Maybe you had a conflict with someone that you were working on. It makes you sad. How can you work with that? Maybe you tried something and it didn't work. How do you deal with that, right? So these are all things that we can learn how to do better. Yeah, there's so many different ways of doing that. I just put here some of the things that I've heard about, heard people talking about. So some people have been saying that they've tried mindfulness, which meditation, and it's helped them to better understand their feelings and better cope with them. So that, of course, for you, it might be something you need to try. There's now, from psychology, these wild character strengths. You can take an online test, and then it gives you a list of what are your psychological strengths and what are things that you're not so good on. so you can focus on using your strengths in your favor and try to study about the things that are your weaknesses and learn about them, how to improve. And of course, I hope everybody knows that, but somebody doesn't. If you do need help, the university has resources here with counselors and doctors that you can reach, also talk to somebody. And put the last item there, which is actually for me what I have been doing for years actually since I even became a graduate student, and has been really helpful, is study of philosophy, which is a method that helps do exactly what I said, help me study myself and understand why I do things the way I do, why I feel the way I do, and how I can do things differently, how I can learn to be more patient, how I can learn to deal with failures better, how I could learn to speak in public better, which for me was very difficult some years ago, but now it's a bit easier. So it's just to mention there, because we are on time, but if that seems something interesting about philosophy, I know about a lot about it, and there is a website there with information, books you can download, of course, that you can ask for. So if that seems interesting, ask me about it, and we can talk. So thank you for listening. This was a bit longer than I expected, but if you want to ask something or to comment about something that I talked about, or if you have any interesting experience or tips of your own sort that you want to bring last time. Any questions or comments?
I actually have a question relating the beginning of it all, because a lot of students struggle just to kind of get into that mindset of, how do I even find something that's worthwhile in this field? Do you have any tips for students that are just starting? And HCI seems like this massive, giant field that does everything and anything. How, what strategies would you suggest can they apply to focus? Now, in your case, it was a specific coincidence that things worked out the way they did. That might not apply to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so it might work different for person, but I think what is probably helpful is to not try just to come up with something on your own, but to get to know what people are doing in the field. First, as Leonard said, HCI is a very large field. So if you just try to do anything HCI, you're going to be lost. So first, I think you need to narrow down to within HCI specifically where you want to work on, and for that, I think it's just a matter of preference, because there's so many different things that can work. So what do you want to work on? Let's just have to decide it. Once you do that, I think that don't then sit on your desk and try to come up with an idea out of the blue, because it's hard. And once you have exactly where you want to work on, I would say go and see what people are doing there. Read papers, go to conference, maybe go to other people here at BGI and ask what they're doing. Try to look for those things as I had them. This is live. These are the things. The next slide. These are the things I look for when we are looking at what people are doing, trying to find things that have an issue or shortcoming that maybe you can try to solve, or try to identify someone saying that they need something that doesn't exist yet, so maybe the person that is going to solve that need. That's what I can suggest.
So in terms of knowing thyself and self-improvement and such, you mentioned a couple times how early on, you weren't as rigorous in your study designs, your statistics as you have become.
Mhm.
Is there something now that you're close to the end that you can identify you're still working on? Or you've begun to work on?
Let's see, what can I say? I mean, learning. One thing that I'm always working on is learning statistical methods. I didn't learn them all in the beginning. I think there's just so many that it's just like I did try to learn them all in the beginning, but in the beginning I read a book to have an idea of what methods are out there. But then each time I do a different type of study that I never done before, then I need to go there and study that particular method to use for that situation. So learning statistical method is something I'm always doing. And something for my current studies, something that I'm trying to improve is exactly this part here, like preparing the study, having already in mind what I'm going to say later, how I'm going to present that study. So I've just begun doing this for my studies, but I'm sure there's a lot that I can improve there yet. As I said, I think ideally I should reach the point where when I go write the paper, like the draft of the paper is already there. It's just transferring all the information from the study design into the paper. Because really the paper should be a report of what you've done. So you should not be creating things there. You should just be summarizing things that you have already described to yourself before. So that's something that I'm still doing. Something else? Alright, yeah. Thank you again for listening, and if you want to talk with me about one of these topics later, then I will be happy to talk about them. So just look for me or send me a message on Slack. Let's discuss this. Thank you very much.